Okay, so let's do a very gorgeous, if not a little bit modernised 1960s makeup look. Now I've given my hair a little zhuzh, so we've got a little bit of a beehivey thing going on here. And I am going to do what I'm going to describe as semi-authentic 60s makeup. So I'm going to take a little bit of artistic license and I am going to modernise it a little bit. But obviously, if you want to do yours as a more authentic version or a much more modern version, that's absolutely fine as well. This is not a style that is going to ever go out of fashion. I think it's very much here to stay. So, you know, there's been lots of different versions of it. It's been adapted many times before for catwalks and things like that. And I think that's always going to be the case because it is so iconic. So I'm just going to use a kind of medium coverage foundation. I'm using, what am I using? L'Oreal True Match for this. You can use any sort of foundation you want, really, I'd say, for this look. I think the trick, though, if you want it to be a little bit more authentic, is to make sure that you're powdering it, because this look is quite matte in its finish, okay? Naturally, like that would have been the style for the time. So with my foundation application, I like to start, I've done my skin prep already, so I've already done a little bit of moisturising and priming where I need it, and I'm going to put quite a heavy coverage down, I think, for this look, because I find that when I want a matte look, it actually tends to work a little bit better with a slightly heavier coverage. So I like to just apply my foundation in the centre of my face with a slightly smaller brush, and then I'll take a larger brush and I'll just use that to kind of buff it and press it out. And all I do is go back and kind of push the product. I'm kind of bouncing the brush around, really. And all this does is kind of gives a little bit more adhesion to my face. Now when I want a bit more coverage, I just go back in and add a little bit more. And then I go back to my buffing brush. And when I'm at the outside of my face, or my model's face, my client's face, what I tend to do is try to use whatever's just left on the brush, because we've got lots of very fine hairs generally just around the outside of the face. So what you tend to find is that if you put too much product in there, you kind of get a bit of texture, which you don't necessarily want. So I try to just make sure that when I'm buffing and blending my product, that when I'm at the outside of the face, I've got a lot less on my brush. As you can see. Just going to dust over the eyelid. And then one thing I'm going to do is, well, it's quite warm in here, so I've got a little bit of pink on my ear. Don't forget the ears, you know. When you're working in makeup, particularly for photography, the amount of times people forget about the ears, and you get these little pink ears showing through. Not a good look. Okay, I'm going to take a slightly lighter foundation. I'm not really going to use much concealer in this look because my foundation's quite buildable, and I'm just going to build it up a little bit where I want some extra coverage in the centre of the face. And again, I'm using the same brush. You really want to be in the habit of trying to do as much as possible with as few brushes, because when you have those back-to-back clients or back-to-back models on a job, you really don't want to have to be trying to clean down those brushes in between, and you can't carry hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of brushes around with you. So learn to do as much as you can with as few brushes as possible. That would be my advice. Okay, so in the 60s, one of the things that we also did see quite a bit of is we tended to find there was a little bit more bronzing, and tanning became a little bit more popular. So around this time, people were more conscious about being tanned, so we did see more bronzing on the skin. Now, what I'm going to do first, I think, is just put a nice dusting of translucent powder all over. I'm using the RCMA loose powder. You can use any, or you could use a compact powder. It doesn't matter, whatever you feel works well for your particular skin type. Now, I'm not going to take a huge powder brush. I'm going to take a slightly smaller one, and particularly where I want extra mattifying, so I know I want it around this eye area, I'm going to push my powder in. Now remember, if you're doing a more matte look like this one, it's quite important to make sure that you have done the appropriate skin prep. What you don't want to do is go adding a ton of mattifying products on top of skin that is still quite dry. So I'm going to take my bronzer now. I'm going to use a powder bronzer, because if you remember when we talked earlier, we were looking really more at mattified finishes, weren't we? So let's take a bit of our powder bronzer, and I'm actually going to bronze up quite a bit for this look. So I'm going to go for that slightly more sort of I'm going to call this disco bronzing, okay? I don't know why, but I just feel like that's what it's more appropriate for. And I'm going to take it all around the outside of my face. I'm going to take it down, right down into my temple and my eye socket. I'm going to do the same on both sides. And I'm using big circular motions, but I am still using that small powder brush, and I'm going to bring my bronzer up underneath the apples of my cheeks, because we're going to get a nice dose of blush right on the apples of the cheeks as well. One of the things that's quite nice about shaping the face with the bronzer is that it does a lot of the work for you. So I know that we think of it like, oh, I've got to contour then bronze, but not necessarily. You can do what I'm doing here, which is take that bronzer and do a lot of the shape work with it. Kind of create a bit of a map for you to work with. Let's bring a bit of this just down the centre of my face. And now I've got a lot more shape in my face, which is good. I've got my coverage, but I'm still quite mattified because I've used a lot of powders, haven't I? Okay, let's bring in some blusher. Now, obviously you can do the eye makeup first on this if you choose to, and then do the face work, so your foundation and things like that. That's absolutely fine. I would say that needs to be dependent upon the products you're going to use. So if you're going to use lots of loose products, it would definitely be advisable to switch it round. Or if, like me, I'm going to use a lot of pencils and things like that, I think I can get away, hopefully without too much fall down, but we will see. So I'm actually using my Revolution Pro Lam palette here, and I'm going to use these kind of real pinky coral powder blushes, tap off the excess, and I'm going to bring them more in the centre of my face. So this is going to be a bit more dolly-like. When we're trying to lift with our blusher, we tend to bring it up the sides of the face. With the 1960s, it was a little bit more sort of cartoon dolly-ish, so I'm going to go more in the centre. And I'm going to use a little gentle tapping action for this. Just kind of tap that product on. Now remember, where we place our bronzer and our blusher really affects the overall finish on the face, because if we place it at the front, it tends to make our face look a little bit more full and a bit more kind of round, and if we place it up the back, it tends to make it more lifted. So where we place it really matters. I'm going to bring a little bit across the middle of my nose, and then I always quite like to bring a little bit up into this brow socket as well, because it just creates a bit of connection. And at this point, I'm looking a bit mad, but that's okay. It'll all make sense nearer the finish. Now I'm probably going to make myself look a little bit crazy here, but I'm going to actually put some brow product in, because I like, when I'm doing an eye makeup look, to put the brows in so that I have a bit of a framing face sort of measurement to work with, if that makes sense. So I'm going to put my brow products in next, and I'm going to use, I think, a cake brow product. So that is a brow product that I can add a bit of setting spray to or water to. It starts its life as a solid. This is Illamasqua Brow Cake. And I'm going to add some liquid to it to make it a liquid product that I can draw with. Cake products have been around for a really, really long time. They're kind of one of the original makeup products, actually. But I feel like they kind of don't get the recognition they deserve, if that makes sense. I feel like we've got so used to using things like pomades and creams and stuff like that we don't tend to realise just how useful they are. They're great because we can use them both as a liquid and as a powder, which is brilliant. Now, because this is a semi-authentic 1960s look, I am going to draw them in quite a bit. So they are going to be quite sort of drawn and defined, but probably a little bit less sort of pencil-like as they would have been in the 60s, because I do have slightly thicker natural brows, and I am in no position, or am I in no way willing to start plucking out my eyebrow hair to get a skinny 60s brow, because it took long enough to grow this eyebrow hair back, do you know what I mean? But what I am going to do is define them a lot more, and I'm going to make them, I think, a bit more rounded, because I feel like that kind of fits with this style. So I'm going to just really focus on shaping the top of the brow into more of a rounded shape, because I feel like that gives us that sort of 60s feel quite well. And then just with whatever's left on my brush, I'm just going to brush that through. So we're starting to create the arch shapes, which are quite synonymous with the sort of 60s look, really. And I'm using an angle brush, and I'm just bringing it across the top of my brow to create that sense of shape and definition. So this is definitely going to make me look a little bit mad to begin with. That's okay. Okay, what I think I'm going to do now is zoom you guys in a little bit for some more eye work. So before we do anything, let's create a bit of shape on the eye first. So I'm going to take a bit of matte brown shadow, and all I'm going to do is create my eye shape. Now I know I'm going to be doing my arch with my black pencil, so I'm going to work my shape actually above the crease of my eye and not in it, and what that will do is give me a little bit of a shape to be working with. So can you see how I've got the brush tilted so that what I'm actually doing is I'm not in the crease of my eye, I'm actually above it. I'm in that space between the crease and the hollow of my eye socket. And that is creating the shape for me. It's giving me what I would describe as being a bit of a map to work from. I'm also going to do the same thing by bringing some shadow, not on the actual lower lash line itself, but in the gap where my eye starts to hollow into my eye socket. And again, it's creating a nice round shape. You're going to think I'm going mad, but stick with me, everybody. Okay, so now we've got some sort of a map. We've got a little bit of a shape starting to form. We can start to think about this section of the eye. Now, there's a couple of ways we can do this with our work on the lid. We can put, we can just draw our crease line in where we want it. So we can draw our little floating black line in where we want it. Or we can do the old kind of cut crease trick if you'd prefer. If you want to use more of like a more of a guide to do it. So I'm going to use a little bit of my white emulsion by Depixim. This is a liquid paint. Now you could just do this with a liquid concealer, or you could even use a lighter foundation colour, or just your foundation colour if you would prefer, if that would make this a little bit easier. But I want to use this white paint. I think it'll show up better for you guys as well on camera to do it like this. So to discover where I'm going to put my arch, I'm kind of going to just use that cut crease trick really, of placing a little bit of that white colour down and looking all the way up. And can you see I get that nice transfer there? And that shows me where I can work up to. Now, because I'm going to do a little bit of a floating line, I'm actually going to go slightly above that. So if you miss that the first time, all we do is place a bit of product down on our lid. We look all the way up. I tend to look down actually, weirdly. I feel like that gives me a more accurate guide, and then that is our line. We can see that transfer shows us where we should be working to. And I'm going to bring this white all the way along, and I'm not really worried about the line being really neat like I would if I was doing like a full-on cut crease. And the reason for that is because I'm going to draw over it anyway with my black liner, so it doesn't need to be like this crisp line. It can kind of be a little bit kind of, you know, rough around the edges. Let's just buff out these edges a little bit. So we've got a nice kind of chalky finish. So what's great about using something like an emulsion or a white eye base is that it should dry down quite matte. And again, as we know, that's kind of the point of the texture for this look. I'm actually going to take this a little bit in the inner corner as well, because I feel like that will really give us that kind of full-on 60s vibe. I'm also going to take a little bit of it down through the lower lash line, not all the way. I don't want to have a big white circle around my eye. That's a look for a different day. You could do this if you've got like a really nice coloured base of like maybe like blues or pinks. This would look gorgeous. It doesn't have to be white, but I feel like the white's going to be the best to show up on camera here. Let's just buff these out. Okay, so what we've got now is a nice light area ready for some floating geometric lines. I'm going to take a little bit of white eyeshadow and I'm going to just push this over the top to really emphasize that lovely light. And this is also making sure that the product we're using isn't going to be sticky or tacky or anything like that. Notice I'm still using the same brush I was using before, You don't need to use hundreds of brushes for this. Oh, I'm looking well and truly wacky now, but that's okay. This is going to look so cute when it's finished. Now we're managing to avoid too much fall down. We're getting a little bit of the white fall down, but it's not too dramatic. Just with what's left on my brush, I'm going to do a little buff of that white into my brow bone as well. Okay, looking good. I'm also going to take, this is actually a slightly pink eye pencil, but you could do a white if you wanted, or a cream. And I'm just going to take that along my waterline. You could add, in fact, what would be gorgeous is to add a colour into the waterline with this look. That would go very beautifully. So I'm going to use a little kohl pencil first. And I'm going to sharpen it so that it's quite sharp, but not too sharp. And so this is my kohl pencil, if you're not sure what I'm talking about. And I'm going to look straight ahead because I want to make sure that I'm not in my crease line, I'm above it, okay? If I'm in my crease line, I'm not going to see it, and it's important that we can see it. So all I'm going to do is sketch out. And the beauty of using my pencil is that because it's really soft, I'm going to be able to do a little blending thing with it. And I've got my guides in from the white product we've put down and from the shadow. And I'm not going to go all the way to the end. I'm going to leave a little gap either side. I'm going to take a small pencil brush, something like this kind of thing here. And I'm going to do little back and forth movements to just smoke this out. And I'm being very careful to soften it and make it sort of smoky and a bit grey without losing control of it. I still want to maintain the shape. Let's go and do the same on the other side. And remember, we're not looking for perfection at this point. We're just getting that lovely contrasting floating line in. Let's let it come out a little to the side so we get this little nice sort of kick. We're going to do the same on this side. If you haven't got enough product to do that, don't worry, you can always go back with your pencil. You have to decide how far in you want this to go, and it really depends on the drama you want to create. Remember, you can make it float just right up in the top there if you want it to, if you don't want it to kick out too far. You know, in for a penny, in for a pound, if you ask me. I'm going to go all the way in and all the way out. What I don't want to do is connect it up. I want it to float, okay? Now, where I want it to be even more dramatic, I can pick up a little bit of black shadow, particularly in this central section here. Now I know where I want it to go, and just accentuate it a little bit. I'm actually going to use a little bit of that emulsion paint, so that white liquid. Now if it's your concealer, you can pick up your concealer instead, and I'm just going to go back on a flat brush and just kind of crisp up that line. So I'm going to go along and just kind of sharpen it up a little bit, just by using a little swiping and tapping action. And this just allows me to kind of level things up a little bit, create a slightly harder edge if I want one. Now you don't have to have one, of course. You could do this all very soft if you wanted to. But I want to define it and give it that real disconnection. Now, let's get the rest of our eyeliner on. So I'm going to use a gel liner, I think, and I'm going to use a small brush that's a little bit more like a paintbrush. And you could do this with your general liquid liner if you wanted to, or you could do this with a cake liner. It works quite well with a cake liner. And the important thing about this is that we want to make sure that we're not trying to create a big flick eye, because that's more 40s and 50s. We want to continue to work with the round shape that we've created. So what that means is that our eyeliner is going to be thicker in the middle and thinner on the edges, as opposed to thinner getting thicker. Okay, so we're going to be thicker in the middle and thinner on the edges, and this is quite nice. This is the what I would call the sort of very doughy-eyed look. So first thing I'm going to do is just get down a rough liner right down into that lash line. And when I'm happy that it's down, now I might have to wipe off my brush a couple of times, because that product is going to, that white product is going to want to keep gripping to the brush. So I might have to just keep wiping it off to make sure that it stays nice and clean. And I'm hoping that at this point you can see what I mean when I say doughy-eyed. And if you wanted to do a more subtle version of this, of course you could do it with your pencil. Or if you wanted to do a much more sort of jazzy version, it might be nice to do this instead of with a black, but with a coloured liner. Just maybe a bright pink or a purple or a blue, something like that. Still with our black liner, we're going to do a little bit of a line on the underneath, and I'm actually not going to line right up against my lash line on the bottom. I'm going to come just a little bit below it. So I'm going to create a slightly floating line on the bottom as well. So we'll end up with a bit of an air gap between the two. And again, we want our line to start thinner at the edges, become thicker in the middle and thinner on the edge again. And now with a little bit of liner on our small brush, we're going to create the illusion of, actually I'm just going to bring this out a little further there. Let's do the same on that side. cute. Right, we're just going to create the illusion of some little bottom lashes. So we're just going to take our brush and we're just going to go to our little line and we're just going to pull out some super cute little bottom lashes. And we can do these all the way along, or we can just do them part way. I'm going to start with mine being a bit longer on the outside and just let them get a bit thinner. Now, as per the 60s style, we're going to put on a lashing of mascara. Just going to really load up my lashes at this point. Now, this is my own personal mascara, so I'm using it directly from the wand. But of course, if this was my model or my client, I'd be being very careful to make sure that I was not doing anything that would breach my health and safety. So I would be decanting it onto a disposable wand. While we let those dry, let's add a bit of lipstick. So I'm going to add a good matte lip. Now we could, if it was for a photo, just put a bit of foundation over our lips and that would take away the colour, but that's not going to last and that's going to go very sort of broken down and not really work for our clients. It's only really going to work momentarily for a photo shoot. So I'm going to use a matte lipstick in a proper real nude colour. Now this is a Morphe lipstick in the colour Wifey. It's very, very matte, so it's very drying. I'm going to take some of that. I'm actually going to put it on a big fluffy brush as opposed to like a small lip brush. And I'm going to really pat that all over my lip. And the reason I'm using a thicker brush, like a fluffier brush, is because I want it to be a bit blurred and a bit diffused. So the fluffier these lashes are, the better. The softer they are, the better. Alternatively, what can work quite nicely is if you take a full set of lashes and kind of cut them up and put them down in maybe 3 sections. So you get that real rounded shape. And here we are with our finished 1960s inspired dolly twiggy look. We've got the full floaty liner, we've gone for the big jet black lines, we've got the fluffy lashes, and we've got the matte texture with the little rosy cheeks.